let's go back to your parents for a little bit. Can you tell me what kind of person your father was?
He was a very, I always say, very handsome man. Very kind, but he could also get angry. Not so much at us. Well, yeah, I got a spanking from him once. But, the animals, if the cows would do what they're supposed to, the horses, he could get angry with them. My mother was very mild-mannered, although she and I had our, when you're a teenager, you think you're being the oldest in the family. I thought, boy, they're sure taking advantage of me. I had to do all this work and everything. Nothing was ever good enough or right. So, for a while we had this problem, but that's fine. I think every mother and teenager probably go through that. Yeah, they were great parents. I mean, my mother saw to it that I got piano, that, I was able to take piano lessons, so I started at age 9. They take me to Leola, which is 50 miles away, every Saturday, so I could get my piano lessons. And, which I think was kind of a hardship on them, but they did it, and I'm forever grateful that they did. Until Mom became pregnant again, the last one, and then they couldn't take me into Leola so often, so I quit at age 12. Then I took some lessons at Northern and later on from some other people yet.
Can you describe your relationship with your father?
It was very good. I remember when, let's see, he told me this many years later, but when I was in nursing school, they came down to see me, and then and I had told him before that I didn't have much money left, but of course that time nobody had any money hardly. And they came home, and then he remembered he'd forgotten to give me any money. And many years later he told me how badly he felt to think that he forgot to give me some money. And I never knew that it bothered him that much, but it really bothered him for many years. And I had told my parents, now, I mean, they were wonderful parents. I had told them before I went to nursing school that some older nurse had told me this, is if you ever want to quit, don't quit. Stay with it. It's tough, but, just get over it. So I told my parents, I said, if you come down and I want to come home, I want to quit nursing, don't let me come home. Just make me stay. And sure enough, there came a time, I think it was my first preclinical, must have been the first 6 months or so. Oh, things were so tough. I didn't know if I could want to do it. And I complained to them, and they said, well, no, they wouldn't take me home. They paid attention to what I had said, and I'm so glad they didn't. Because after the next few days, then I was fine again. So, yeah, they were wonderful parents.
How did they cope with hard times?
They did. See, when the banks all went bankrupt, or closed, they lost several $1,000s that they had in the bank, and at that time, that was a lot of money. And they, growing family was we were, well, at the time I was the only child, but then my brother came a little later, and then sisters. And we had well problems. They had to dig wells to get water, and somehow managed. Did with what we had. There was some relief. You could get, some food through what they call the relief. But we never got a whole lot because they always thought we had too much in assets, I guess. Whatever. And Dad would work on the road crew once in a while just to try and get a little money put together, too. Then there was the dry years, and then grandparents brought their horses and cattle, some of their horses and cattle down to our pasture because our pasture was pretty good when theirs wasn't. So maybe they got a little rent off that, I'm not sure. But anyway, they managed somehow. I never knew I was poor. I mean, I knew I couldn't get whatever I wanted. I'd look at catalogs, you know. Well, we got one nice dress for Easter, and that was our good dress, and a pair of shoes for summer, and then for school you got, well, mostly overalls, I think we wore. I'd like to see some of our kids wear some of the things we had to wear. I remember walking to school one time. I had a long coat, and it was cold that morning, and something kept hitting me in the side of the leg. Couldn't figure out what in the world was hard in that bottom of that coat. Well, when it thawed out, when I came home and I checked it, here I had gathered the eggs the night before. I put some in my pocket, and there was a hole in the pocket. One egg had fallen down the bottom, and when I walked to school, it froze. It kept hitting me in the leg. Stupid thing. That's just some of the school experiences. That's another one that I forgot to tell you about, but.
Right. Can you tell me which one of your parents was the stricter parent?
Well, in some ways I think my mother was. My dad was kind of a pussycat at times. He could be strict and get angry, but I remember one time they had gone to town on a Saturday, and I was home, of course, with the other kids. And by the time they came home, I know my brother maybe helped with the milking, but I think there must be 11 or 13 cows. I finished the milking. I finished baking the bread. And my dad says, well, now we've got to take you into the carnival. There's a carnival in town. So that night we got to go to the carnival because I had done all that work. So, like I said, he was kind of a pussycat. You know, he was soft-hearted. And of course, Mom agreed with that, too. You know, well, if I did all that work, we deserved to go into the carnival.
All right. Do you know how they met?
Uh-huh. Koopelman. Matchmaker. Dad's parents lived about 25 miles from Eureka, and Mom's parents lived north of Eureka, so there was quite a distance in there. And Dad was getting to be 24, 25 years old and still not married, and that was, that was kind of disastrous at that time. And his sister had married a man from up in that area where my Mom's parents lived. So they knew about Mom and they knew about Dad, and so they said, well, they asked Dad if he would be interested in meeting. So he drove up there, and then whoever was supposed to go with him got sicker, then somebody else had to go with him, and I don't remember. All the stories in this, my folks' 50th anniversary book. Anyway, they took him over to my grandparents' house, and he says there were all these faces looking out the window. There were so many younger kids, and they're wondering who was coming there. And so they met, and that was in the fall of the year. It must have been August or September. And then they started seeing each other. He'd drive up there, but then his this in the cars at that time they stored their cars in the garage for the winter. They wouldn't drive them, so they thought, well, they have to get married. They want to get married before the winter comes. So they must have met in September, got married December 23rd. But Mom said they wanted me to give them an answer right away the first night after they brought Dad there, and she wouldn't do that. She wanted to get to know him a little better. Well, that's what a Koopelman one did, a matchmaker. But my brother tells the stories of funny how it's in their history, how he when they were supposed to get the car started to go out and go to my mom's family, his car wouldn't start. Dad says, "Yeah, schon wieder keklik." Again, no luck, or something like this. But anyway, it all worked out. But I can't believe it. Of course, and then my husband and I didn't know each other much longer than that either.
How did you meet your husband?
In a bar. I was working up here in Eureka, and some of us girls went out one night to what they called sports bar at the time, and he was in there with a bunch of guys. Of course, pretty soon, one of the other guys came over. I didn't know anybody up here at the time, hardly anybody except my relatives. Anyway, one guy came over and he sat beside me, and this one girl was sitting across from me. She kept shaking her head. Don't get mixed up with him, Then he left. He knew I didn't want anything to do with him. Pretty soon, Arnie came over and sat down. Then this girl went like this. And so that's how we met for the first time. Although I had chased him out of the hospital room. I was a nurse up here, and then he was visiting someone, and he was past visiting hours, and he wouldn't leave. The nurse's aide said, "Well, we told him visiting hours were over, and he didn't leave." I said, "I'll get him out of there." But I didn't. There was no formal meeting. I just told him, "Well, visiting hours are over." Okay.
And how long did you know him before you were married?
Well, we met in July. We were married in October. Got engaged in September and got married in October.
Can you tell us about your wedding?
Sure I can. It was a big wedding. A lot of people invited. In the old Reformed church in Eureka. And we had a reception out at the country club with a full dinner, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, gravy. It must have had kuchen, I'm sure, or pies. All the aunts and uncles helped prepare it, helped serve it. The aunts did. Then we had a wedding dance. And with the, first they sold the cake. Whoever put in the last bid for the cake got to cut the cake and feed it to us. And then we had what they called a bride dance, where the couple, a man and a woman would come up and they'd pay so much for a dance. They'd also get a drink of schnapps. And they'd dance around once or twice, and then, then that was it. And then another couple would come up. And that's how we went on our honeymoon. We made enough money that way, because we didn't have any money, or not enough money to go on a honeymoon. Well, we would have had probably, but that's what we used for our honeymoon trip then.
Where'd you go on your honeymoon?
Black Hills.
Where did you get your dress for your wedding?
In Aberdeen, at Pred's. I still have it. It's still a beautiful dress, I think. The veil is pretty well tore up already. It's been used several times by others, but the dress is still a very pretty dress. And the first night after we were married, we didn't know enough to get reservations at a hotel. So we got to Aberdeen, went to the big Alonzo Ward Hotel. No rooms available except upstairs where the railroad men always slept, and there's about 24 beds in there, but there's no one up there tonight, they said. So we were in this huge room upstairs with 24 beds.
Is there anything else you remember about your wedding that you'd like to share?
Not really. I mean, there's a lot of memories, but nothing that's worthwhile mentioning, I don't think. That really, not that I can recall right now. All I remember is the food, all the food there was, and I can't believe that they did that.
All right, let's talk a little bit about your siblings when you were growing up. Can you tell me the birth order of your brothers and sisters?
Uh-huh. My brother was born April 28, 1931.
And what was his name?
Marcus.
Okay.
And then my next sister is Ruth, married to Leroy Ganser. Ruth Ganser. She was born October 12th, 1934. And my next sister is Marion, married to Marvin Huffman. She was born July 21, 1935. And then my baby sister, born November 4th, 1939.
And what was her name?
Rosina, after her grandma. She's shaped like her grandma, too.
Right. Which one of your siblings were you closest to growing up?
I think it had to be my brother because he was closer to my age. We would fight a lot when we were little until he was able to beat me up, and then the fighting quit. The other sisters were younger. They would get into my things, like once I started using lipstick, they'd get into my lipstick and all this stuff, But now, of course, I'm just as close to them as anything. Then my youngest sister, she was young when I went off to school, nursing school, and oh my gosh, when I'd come home, she wouldn't leave my lap or anything, so.
Was there any competition in your family growing up between the siblings?
I didn't think so. Not that I'm aware of. And we still, I don't think, we get along just wonderfully. We're all going to get together now in a couple of weeks for a family reunion out in the hills.
Right. Do you remember the births of any of your younger siblings?
Yeah, I remember the one, Marion, was the one that was born in 1935. That was kind of funny because my uncle and aunt lived a quarter mile from our place. And my dad said, hey, why don't you and Marcus go up to Uncle Carl's? They have a new baby up there. You want to see the new baby? Okay, so we went up there. Spent all the afternoon up there. Pretty soon, he says, we'll call you when you're supposed to come home. Pretty soon Dad called up, we should come home, there's a baby at our house. I had no idea. And then, let's see, yeah, and then there was Rosina. Well, that one I remember because my mother told me that she was pregnant, and and of course by that time I was older and I knew that that's what was going on. And, she said that she'd be going in, or to have the baby, and that I should, have to be kind of take care of the others and what I should be doing and this and that. So I remember that one. But I remember my grandma, Job, I must have been kind of a bratty kid, because that morning I called down something about wearing something, and I don't know, did my grandma say something? And I must have said something that wasn't very, kind of snotted her off a little bit. Then I realized this isn't my mother, this is Grandma. And then my mother had the baby. And I wasn't aware of it. But anyway, Grandma was out there then. So I wasn't very nice that morning.
So what was it like having a new baby in the house?
Oh, we enjoyed her. Except one time, she'd get tonsillitis so often. And severe case of tonsillitis. And one time, Mom was out in the garden and I was in the house taking care of her. And I held her in my arms and she started like she was going to go into convulsions. And boy, that really scared me. She didn't convulse all the way, but she just kind of started, and then I must have laid her down quietly or something. So I went down and I told Mom. Well, then they realized that there was something, that she had a high temp or something. So I don't know, did they take her to the doctor then or not? But anyway, later on she had her tonsillectomy, so that took care of that problem. But yeah, I remember that. Other than that, the usual, I suppose.
What kinds of mischief did you get into with your siblings?
Some that I can't tell about, but no, I really don't. I suppose we got in all kinds of things occasionally, you know. But, you know, we were so busy making mud pies, so we'd do our own thing as far as, you know, playing outside, and then we'd have to work. We didn't have a lot of time to get into mischief.
What kinds of things? Oh, go ahead.
No.
What kinds of things did you play?
Well, like I said, when I was younger, we'd had our own little kitchen outside by the drill and the machine shed, you know. Oh my goodness, we made mud pies, and that was the big thing, mud pies, working with that.
And how did you make your mud pies?
Well, just with dirt and water, and then you shape it, and I think you had something instead of like now they have modeling clay or whatever. And swings, played with the cats. Andy I over. Oh, that was a big thing. Andy I over. I don't know if anybody remembers that. We'd throw the ball over the barn. And as soon as we throw it with Andy I over, then we knew it was coming. We'd try and catch it. And then we throw it back. Other games I just don't remember. Out on the farm, you know. Well, horseshoes. We always played horseshoes and baseball and kitten ball. Well, that was about the same thing. And then cricket. We learned to play what we call cricket. I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but we call cricket.
How did you play that?
Well, you scratched out a little diamond in the ground, and you laid a short stick across it. You had a long stick, and you try to shoot it out of that little hole in the ground. And I don't know where we were supposed to do it. Were we trying to get it further than anyone else? I don't remember what the object of the game was, but I remember doing that. I don't think it was there is a game of cricket, but I don't think that is the one that they're talking about in England.
What kinds of games did you play inside?
Cards. Play a lot of cards. Checkers. Dad was a great checker player. So I'm playing checkers with my son-in-law now on the computer. We have 2 games going all the time.
Did you play Chinese checkers?
Later on, when they came out, yeah, we had Chinese checkers, but first we just the regular checkers. And, we had dominoes, but I don't know if we played a game with dominoes. I think we just played with them. But cards was a big thing.
What card games did you play?
Rummy, high-low. I think those were the two main ones that I can remember.
Okay. Did your parents ever play with you?
Always. They taught us how, and they played with us.
Did they play outside games with you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, baseball and horseshoes and all that. I say baseball, but usually it was a kitten ball, you know, softer, or what they call a softball now. We called them kitten ball at that time.
What was your favorite game to play?
That. Although I liked horseshoes. I still kind of like to play horseshoes now and then.
Okay. Did you ever play with animals on your farm?
Oh, sure, we always had cats. Cats I played with a lot. Not as much as one of my sisters. But I liked cats. And then the dog, we always had dogs. And I always wanted to ride horseback, and I never did learn how. Although I was on the back of a horse, but I never stay on very long.
Did you ever go hunting or fishing as a child?
No.
Okay.
Not hunting, I didn't. And fishing, no. My dad, we never went fishing. Something probably a lot of people don't know about is the Indian potatoes or wild turnips. When I've talked to people about them, nobody seems to know what I'm talking about. Well, my dad would take us out in the pasture. He says, oh, he said, here's a plant, here's an Indian potato. He would dig it out. There's a thing about this big around. He'd peel it, and we could eat it right out. And I have a wall hanging out in the kitchen with those wild turnips or Indian potatoes. And the Indians still may use them, and they make wall hangings out of them and stuff. And everybody I've ever talked to, no one has ever known anything about it. How my dad knew about it, I don't know. And the plant is very similar to another plant, and so many times I would try and dig it. We didn't have the right one. I'd have nothing on the bottom, but you had to know the plant. And I know one time I was at our Senate convention, and we had an Indian pastor there, and she had some of these wall hangings with the Indian potatoes, and I walked by and I said, oh, I said, Indian potatoes. And she started laughing. She says, you know about them? I said, yeah. She's so surprised that I did. And I said, well, my dad knew about them, but how he learned of them, I don't know. I should show you those, but what they are.
Yeah, we'll take a picture when we
Okay.
go out there. Right? Let's switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about chores that you did when you were growing up.
Oh dear. Be easier if I say what I didn't do. Well, I built my first cow at age 4. And I kept on milking. Each year I think I got another extra cow to milk. And, you know, had to get the cows in from the pasture, feed the calves, wash the separator, and gather the eggs, feed the chickens, and whatever else, like in the summertime, you know, when they're shocking and helping in the garden and whatever, I mean, whatever there was to be done, you did. No other, during the week especially, you know, you did what you had to do. You didn't do a lot of entertaining or anything like that, during the summer months especially. And dishes and all that good stuff. And
Laundry.
oh, sure, that was all part of it, I suppose. My mother did the major part of the laundry, though, but we had to, hang out some of the stuff. And we had a separate wash house from our big house. In the summertime, we'd wash down there. We didn't have a summer kitchen. A lot of people had what they called summer kitchens. We didn't have one. But we had a two-story house, so that the lower story never got too awfully hot. The upper story got hot. Oh, I should tell you about our chemical toilet in our house. You know, the little house behind the house, the back house, as we call it in German. And that was torture in the wintertime, especially to go out to that back house. So my dad he must have heard about it from someplace. He bought what they called a chemical toilet, put it upstairs, vented it out the chimney, and you put chemical in it, and you could use it for several days or until it was full, and then we'd have a porch on the back and upstairs. We'd let it down with a rope, and then they could empty it, and we pull it back up, and we didn't have to go outdoors anymore, or at night, or when it was cold and wintry. Summertime we didn't use it, and so we were the envy of the neighborhood to think we had an indoor toilet, even though it was only a chemical one.
Right. Can you tell me more about the house that you grew up in?
Yeah. Well, had a kitchen. And then when I was very young, my parents had the kitchen remodeled, and they had to build an ironing board, which was really neat. It's still there in the old house. And then they had new cupboards put in. There was an entryway. Their bedroom was on the first floor. We had a big dining room with colonnades between the dining room and the living room, which I just love. I wish they could have saved them somehow. And then the living room. And then upstairs were 3 rooms. And I used to think those bedrooms were big until we toured our houses a few years ago. We had a family reunion. How did I ever get a bed in there, plus my wardrobe or a chair or anything? I mean, they looked so small, I just couldn't believe that we thought they were fine. One room was big, but the 2 were small. And that one small one was my room. And
What were sleeping arrangements like?
well, I remember when I was very young, one winter it was so horribly cold, so we moved all the beds into the living room because my parents' bedroom was in the north side, so that room was cold, and the stove was in the dining room, or between the dining room and the living room. So they moved their bed into the living room. I had my bed. My brother had a little basket or whatever, so we all slept in the living room for that one winter for a couple of months when it was so horribly cold. But otherwise, I had the one room upstairs. My brother, well, there was a time when my brother and I slept in the same room. He had a nice little single bed, and I had a double bed, and one of my sisters must have slept with me. The other 2 sisters slept in the other bedroom, and the big room was off limits that year because it was cold in there too. But then, after a while, we all had our own bedroom, and not our own bedroom, but I mean, I had mine, and the girls had theirs, and my brother had his. But so there were 3 rooms. Okay. By the time my little sister was ready to go into her room by herself, then I was gone. I was off to school.
How did you keep your house cool in the summer?
You didn't? Had the windows wide open? I don't think we had any fans. I know we didn't. Yeah, windows wide open. You often wondered, how did we survive it?
Where did you get your water from?
Well, we did finally, well, we had a hand-dug well. We used that for a while until that was no good anymore. And then we dug wells and dug wells. We got water. First, then, while we were doing that, we had to get water from the neighbors, I believe. And then we dug this deep well. We had lots of water, but it was salty. Everybody who came to our house would bring their own water because they couldn't stand to drink that. We got used to it after a while. And then it would get a kind of a film, oily film on top if it set for a while. I kept saying to my brother and my dad, I said, I think you guys should dig deeper, you'd find oil in there. But, of course, we never did. Yeah, it was awful tasting water. People would come to our house, they just couldn't drink it. We got so used to it, we didn't even notice it.
So did you have to bring water up for laundry?
It was good for laundry. It was, it wasn't that hard. Yeah. Oh yeah, we always had a windmill going, and then they'd have to bring it in the house and heat it on the boiler, and pour it into the washer. Oh, when I think of all the work that these women did, I cannot believe how they survived as long as they did.
Did your mother make her own soap for laundry?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how?
No. All I know is it was made with grease, I think, when they butchered pigs, I think. That's what they used it. And then we had a stir lye in there somehow or cook it. Anyway, it was quite a process. But she'd make a lot of her own soap, yeah. I never learned how, though.
How often did you take baths growing up?
That's another joke. Usually on Saturday nights. Or if we were working outside during the summer months where you get so sweaty and dirty, we'd sometimes jump into the water tank, the cattle tank, or else we'd have a barrel sitting outside with catch the rainwater. But usually it was Saturday night was bath nights in a little round tub, and probably 4 or 5 kids taking this bath in the same water. Unreal. I think of it now.
Who got to take their bath first?
I'm not sure. I suppose the little one did.
How often were you supposed to brush your teeth growing up?
Nothing was ever said about that. I suppose, I don't remember when I started brushing. I just don't have any memory of that, but I must have done it at some time or another.
Okay. You mentioned a garden earlier. Can you tell us about your family's garden?
Oh man. We always had a big garden. Then we always had a bustan.
What's that?
I think it's a Russian word. Well, it's what actually it is we used to, bustan was watermelon, muskmelons, cucumbers, and sometimes sweet corn. That was what they call the bustan. Bestan, I think is how it was spelled. And as far as the other, well, we grew all the vegetables that I think my mother could think of at that time, or they could get, and she would can or pickle.
Do you remember the process involved?
Of canning? Oh yeah, because I still do it.
Can you tell us how your mother canned foods?
Well, she would get it ready and put it in jars and put it in when they have these big boilers, copper boilers, and she'd put wood slats in the bottom so it wouldn't rest right on the heat. And then the jars would go in there and they would cook as long as they're supposed to. Oh, yes. And pickled watermelon in a barrel or in a big crock. We always had lots of canned foods and vegetables and that. And I think it's still hanging on with me. I've got canned food out in the garage that I did last year, even though I didn't have a garden. But my son has, so.
Where did you store food to keep it cool during the summer?
Well, we had a cellar. We could keep it down in there. We didn't have to, like some people say, they put the butter down the well or something to keep it cool, but we had a cellar, and that always stayed quite cool in there, so we could keep our butter and things in there. Not like a refrigerator, but it did keep it much cooler than otherwise.
And who usually prepared the meals in your family?
Well, Mom did most of the cooking. I would, I'd have to start cooking when I was quite young once in a while, but she did a lot of it.
What were some of your favorite meals that she prepared?
Cheese buttons. I'd come home from school on weekends and she'd always have cheese buttons for me.
Did you have any least favorite foods?
Yeah. Carrots, I think. Until she fixed them a certain way, and then I started eating carrots and I loved them.
What were some of the traditional German foods that your mother made?
Well, she made dumplings, strudels, and cheese buttons mainly. Knipfla and Sturm I did not know about until I came to Eureka. She never made Sturm that I know of, and she never made just the plain Knipflas.
Did your family ever make ice cream?
Oh, yes.
Homemade
Homemade ice cream? Oh, yes. Yeah, in the wintertime, you always had homemade ice cream. You'd call for... Well, we had a small ice cream freezer, so we'd just make it for our family, but we'd go visiting some people, and first thing they said, well, come on over, we're going to have ice cream for lunch, so they'd have homemade ice cream. Oh, that was good. I still make homemade ice cream at Christmas time.
What did you put in it? Do you remember?
And what I do now? Yeah, well, you steam eggs, syrup, sugar, milk. I think that's it. You steam that until it thickens a little bit and then cool it. And then when it's cooled down, or usually I do it the day before, and then the next day I add a quart of cream and vanilla. And that's your ice cream. My mother would use other flavors. She would sometimes put maple flavoring in and chocolate flavoring, but I like the plain, and then I can always add flavoring later on.
What was your family's attitude towards alcohol?
We always had some in the house. Dad would have his glass of wine, and Mom would have his. Or they'd have beer. I mean, they wouldn't drink to excess or anything, just a glass of beer maybe before a meal, or a glass of wine. And when we were little, as we got older, we got a little bit of wine. As we got older, a little bit more, a little bit more. And the beer the same way. And but Dad never got over the idea that girls should not be drinking, because years later, when my kids were growing up, the boys would get a bottle of wine for Christmas, but the girls didn't. And they never got over that. They said, oh, Grandpa always thinks we shouldn't be drinking any wine. Only the boys could drink wine. But, there was no objection to alcohol. It's just that we always had it around, so we knew it was there, but we knew how to use it.
Did you make your own?
Yeah, they made their own beer. They made their own root beer. They made their own wine. Dad would always make his own wine.
Do you remember how?
No, I never knew how. All I know is that once in a while the beer bottles, they'd cap them themselves, and maybe they capped them too soon or something, and all of a sudden they start popping, exploding up in upstairs.
All right. How did your family get their mail?
We didn't get it but once a week when we went into town.
There were no mail carriers?
We weren't on a mail route. If there were mail carriers, you know, their main highway was about 5 miles from our place, so we would get our mail from town once a week.
What kinds of things did you get in the mail?
Well, we would always subscribe to newspapers and a few magazines. And, of course, whenever we ordered anything, that would come through the mail. And then letters, of course, because that was the only way of communication with, you know, siblings or faraway friends or relatives.
You want to tell us about that picture a little bit?
Well, years ago, they had these little post offices in the country. You know, they call them, and I thought they were little towns, but they really weren't. They were just little post offices. Anyway, this was Martell. And when I did my research for the cemetery book, so often I'd see, well, somebody from the Martell area. Well, I come to find out that's probably where my dad grew up, although at that time it was not the post office anymore, and they had a post office and a store there. So, you know, it was close enough for the farmers to come in and get their mail, and didn't have to go all the way to Eureka or Teleola for their mail and their groceries. So now I know what Martell was all about. And then these are other pictures, probably a different subject.
If you want to show them, that's fine.
Okay. These are 3 Opp sisters. They're my grandpa's sisters. And the 6 Opp brothers.
Did you know any of them when you were growing up?
Uh-huh. Well, yeah, I think I knew them all. There's this one lady on this side had moved out to Oregon, so I never really knew her. But the other 2 lived around here, and so we would visit them. And of course, these all lived in the area. Well, where's Daniel? I think this is Daniel. He's the one that wrote his memoirs of growing up in his early years here in the country. He must have had very little education, yet he was the county, was he auditor or county treasurer? Anyway, had some county job for some years and was able to do it. So it's kind of surprising. But anyway, then years later, we had a family reunion. Oops, this isn't it. Here are the same 3 Opp sisters and the 6 Opp brothers. Many, many years later. So these are all old pictures that my parents had. They were in folders, and they were in a box, and I had them in a box for many years. I finally decided the only way I ever look at them is if I put them in an album. So I took them out of all their folders and put them in the albums. So these are mainly all relatives or acquaintances from years ago, and some were neighbors, and mostly were relatives. So.
Okay. Do you remember when your family got electricity?
Well, we got a wind charger first, what they called. When we got a radio, and it was we had to put up a wind charger. I don't remember when it was. It was in the 40s, probably the middle 40s after the war, I think. And they put up the wind charger. Then that powered our washing machine, I know, and lights. We set some lights and radio and so on.
radio to your family?
Oh my goodness, very important. We must have had I remember when the war started in 41, we came home from church that noon, and I turned on the radio, and I heard this about Pearl Harbor being bombed. And I would always, Sunday nights was Jack Benny night, I believe. And there was somebody else that Dad really liked. He thought it was so funny. So we would listen to those things. And sometimes the batteries would get so low, then you'd have to put your ear right up to it to even hear it. But, and of course Dad was always interested in baseball. So I'd listen to the baseball games, even as a kid. And he'd be working out in the field. And then during World Series time, I had to run out of the field, tell him what the scores were.
Did you have a favorite team back then?
I didn't. And I don't know what Dad's were. Maybe the Yankees. I think he liked the Yankees at that time. Because he was interested in sports all until he died. He was interested in everything until he died. You could talk about any kind of sports. And he was still contributing to the Republican Party even the year before he died. He'd get letters from the Republican Party, and he had donated some money again. So.
Was he very political when you were a child?
That's why I'm such a strong Republican. And then I've got a brother that's such a liberal, and it's funny how things happen. But he was always very, oh gosh, the word Democrat was just such a dirty word to him.
When did your family get a telephone?
Well, I never remember being without a telephone because we had the country phone. You know, you'd have two rings and two short rings and a long. That was ours. I remember that one. And phone would ring, and you'd hear everybody else opening up and listening to see what we were talking about.
All right.
That's how the news traveled at that time.
Did your family always have a car when you were growing up?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember any of them?
Yeah, I remember my, but I don't know what year that was, Chevy that we had, and then later on Dad bought another, I think at 38 he bought a new car. The crops were getting a little better, then he could afford to pay, but we always had cars and the pickups or trucks.
Right.
Not that time they weren't pickups, they were trucks.
Okay. Did you said you parked them in the winter?
Well, no, Dad at that time in the early 1918 and 20 and that, they parked their cars in the wintertime in the garage so they wouldn't use them because it was so cold. Probably wouldn't start anyway.
Right.
But no, my day and age, we always used the cars.
Okay. Can you describe for us a typical winter?
Yeah, where we lived, some years we got snowbound in October and didn't get out until March. We'd go visit neighbors by sled. And, well, sometimes they would try and open the roads to get to church, but that's such a long ways, that it was almost impossible. We were, like I said, I remember some years, I think we were snowbound from October almost until March. So we went to school, saw the kids there, went by sled, or else walked in snow to some neighbors and go sledding in the evening. We had hills where I lived, where I grew up. In the moonlight, we would take our little sleds and whatever we had and slide down the hills until we were wet. Came in, froze, nearly froze. Yeah, it was fun.
Did you ever feel isolated in the winter?
I suppose I did. I don't remember now. Didn't, everybody, it seemed like everybody was the same shoes. Like I said, at that time, we didn't know we were poor. We didn't think we were poor because everybody else was in the same shoes. Even though we had, not too much in material things. Well, we never were hungry. We never always had clothes to wear and everything. But I mean, you didn't have any extras. Not in the 30s.
Can you describe a typical spring for us?
Typical spring. Well, as I remembered, we had nice springs. We don't have springs anymore. We go from winter into summer. And I keep thinking, oh, I remember we used to have such beautiful days in spring. At least I used to look forward to them. Then for the Pasch, look for the Pasch flowers, how happy we were when we could pick the Pasch flowers. And then, farm work would start. Dad would be busy taking the manure out of the barn and putting it in a pile where we made stacks of manure, which was fuel for the winter. I think we talked about that on the internet. Somebody was asking about making mischt. And I remember Dad doing that too. And, spring work would start real early because they'd start plowing probably in March already, many times, unless there was snow on the ground. But otherwise, if it had thawed, they'd start, with the horses you could work early. And they'd have to in order to get the field work done. I didn't have to do any field work, but we'd have to, make sure that the cows were milked and brought home, and the garden was put in, and clucks, the eggs were gathered so that the clucks could sit on the eggs and get the little chickens, and that's when the new kittens would come about, and all kinds of activity on the farm.
Right? What was summer like?
Work, work, work. When I got older, when I was younger, I was out playing, but summer was a lot of work. And then came thrashing time, and that was the worst time of the year for all the mothers and for me.
Can you tell us a little bit about thrashing time?
Yes. We'd have to. Sometimes, if the weather was fine, thrashing would only take probably about a week or so. But sometimes the rains would come, and we'd have the crew laying around. They couldn't work for a couple of weeks. Well, what we have to do in a typical thrashing day, we'd get up at 4, Mom and I would. Well, Dad probably would too. And then we'd have to fix breakfast for the thrashing crew. They'd come around 5 or 5:30. Then we'd have to get the cows milk while the thrashing crew was hitching up and getting out to the field. If we needed to bake kuchen or bake pies for lunch, we would do that then. Or if we fix chicken, we'd have to butcher the chickens, get them cleaned. By 9:30 or 10, we'd have to take the kuchen or the lunch out to the thrashing crew out in the field. At noon, they'd have a big meal at our house again. We always had to have soup because Dad always needed soup. He'd complain when he'd be thrashing at other people's places that didn't have any soup at noon. So we had soup and plus a full meal. At around 4, you would take sandwiches or lunch out to the thrashing crew again, Had to have the dishes done and have all that lunch ready. And then milk, gather the eggs and all of whatever after evening chores there were, and then have a big dinner ready for the thrashing crew when they came in around 9. Then do the dishes. So sometimes I'd get to bed at midnight. I'd be so tired I could almost cry before I'd be back up again. I don't know how those mothers did it. And I did it for a few years to help my mother, but oh my gosh. One year I know we had a hired girl, and then she helped along. Either Mom wasn't feeling well or I was too young yet or something. Anyway, we had a hired girl. I remember that. But sometimes, I mean, Mom and I did that alone. And well, the other kids helped too with whatever they could, but, you know, they were younger and so they couldn't. But that was almost impossible life when I think of it.
Did you ever have to help in the field?
Not in thrashing time. Too much work. I did the shocking in the summertime, helped with the shocking or driving the header box, which I hated.
Why did you hate it so much?
Well, you had to do things just correctly. You have to keep in line with the horses on the header box, because if you didn't, they would throw the grain into your head or in the back of your necks, or if you went, let's see, if you went too fast and then they'll throw the grain on the ground behind you. And there were always grasshoppers, so we always had grasshoppers like you wouldn't believe, and they'd get inside your shirt neck and whatnot. And I hated them. No, I didn't like driving header box at all. Shocking was hard work, but that was a little bit not as stressful as the header box.
Which one of those seasons was your favorite?
Well, I always remember spring as being my favorite. Now I can't say that. The last 20, 30 years, we just haven't had a nice spring.
All right. We're going to switch just a little bit again.
Okay.
And talk about church when you were growing up. So how important was religion to your family during your childhood?
Well, very much. We belonged to the Reformed Church on the country, which was 12 miles from where we lived. And we would get to church no matter what. I know it was mostly, sometimes, it's mostly dirt roads at that time. And I remember driving through dirt and mud that thought we'd get in the ditch and the lake and whatnot, but we never did. But, we had to, we did the milking and all the other stuff beforehand to make sure we'd get there in time. And then we'd always have food ready for the pastor if he didn't have a place to go to eat lunch. The pastor's family would come to our house and have lunch. Or else we'd go to some other people's place for dinner, the noon meal. So it was always kind of arranged. You kind of knew, okay, so-and-so, we're going to invite so-and-so today, or so-and-so is going to invite us today, or whatever. But, going to church was very important. And we always had to know our Sunday school lesson, our catechism, and things like that.
Can you describe what the church building was like?
Yeah, it's just a little one-room building. Very plain, very simple. I could relate it. It's similar to the one they have out of the museum, almost, except it was bigger. At least I think it was bigger. And of course the women sat on one side and the men on the other. And the kids would sit in front because they had Sunday school.
Did you like going to Sunday school?
Mm-hmm.
What did you learn there?
Well, our catechism, our Bible story lessons, and we We always sang a couple of hymns too, the Sunday school did.
Was your church service in German?
Yes. Everything was in German at that time.
You said you took confirmation classes?
In German. Memorized my catechism in German. And my Bible stories, everything was in German. I could read it and write it.
Can you tell me about confirmation classes?
Well, for confirmation classes, we had to go to Hosmer because there was a three parish, I think you call it three church parish. Hosmer, and then one out not too far from Eureka, and then ours. And the pastor served all three of those. So we'd go there for, 3 weeks, I think, confirmation school.
Did you have to board there?
Yeah.
Who did you stay with?
My great uncle and aunt.
What was that experience like?
It was fun. They only had one daughter, and she was killed in a car accident. So we were always some of their favorites. We could stay there. They were always happy to have us. And for me, it was being in town. Oh, I thought that was just heaven.
Right? When you were confirmed, was there a big ceremony?
Yeah. Have you ever been to a Reformed Church confirmation? There's 149 questions in the catechism. Every question and answers. We had memorized all 449 of those. Of course, we memorized some throughout our Sunday school years. But anyway, on Friday, there's what they call a examination. So then we had to recite. We didn't know which ones we would get, but we had to recite the last, beginning with 60 to 120 question and answer in the catechism. We had to recite those. Well, not everybody had to recite every one. They just took, and then the questions the pastor asked. So, okay, so if we passed that, and then that means we were ready for confirmation. Then that was on a Friday. In German, they call it Briefung. You don't know how to spell that.
How do you spell it?
Well, I would spell this with BR umlaut U, and then FUNG, Briefung. And then on Sunday, then is when we got the real confirmation ceremony. We're all dressed in white shoes, white dress, and we'd have to recite the first part of the catechism from 1 to 60. We didn't know which ones we would get. We'd also have to recite some Psalms and some Bible verses. And the pastor would still ask us some questions on the Bible stories that we'd have to answer. So that was kind of stressful. Then by the time we got to take communion, then we were able to take communion for the first time after we were confirmed. And by that time you were so emotional, I think some of us cried when we finally got to take communion.
Did your family have a celebration afterwards?
We had a big dinner at the place where we stayed. Mom would prepare all kinds of food and bring it, and there was 2 other girls that stayed there too, and so they, all the families would bring food, and whoever they'd invite or come there would have a big dinner there. And then in the afternoon there was something else going on, but I can't remember what that was, because that wasn't the end of it yet. Maybe it was the pastor's turn to preach in the afternoon. I'm not sure what went on anymore.
Did your parents restrict anything because of religion?
I don't believe so. I mean, they just had their own, we weren't supposed to date until we were 16. And of course, they discouraged any smoking. And of course, overindulgence in alcohol, that just was a taboo because I had an alcoholic uncle. And so my dad was very firm on that, But we always had it in the house so that we learned how to, a little bit at a time and how to control it.
Okay. How did your family view other faiths?
Well, like everybody else at that time, you were supposed to marry a Reformed, so I married a Lutheran right away. I don't think they looked down on him because we had a lot of friends, and neighbors that were all different religions and the only religion we did not have around our area was, I think, the Catholic. We had, Lutherans, Congregationals, Seventh-day Adventists, Baptists. We're all friends with all of them. But, and I don't think they really looked down on it. They just that they didn't, accept their faith. Well, they had theirs.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about your church or religion when you were growing up?
Oh, not really. Just that the Reformed pastors were very strict. They just stayed with they were not very tolerant of anything else that they didn't feel was biblical.
All right.
And at that time, I didn't see anything wrong with it, so.
Okay. Can you tell me your most stressful childhood experience?
Childhood. Oh, could it be a young teenager?
Sure.
Some young men, and one that I had a crush on, came to the house and wanted to pick me up to go to Loyola. Well, my folks said I could not go alone with him. My brother would have to go along. So I did. Well, once we got out on the open road, we found out that the driver was drunk, or pretty well drunk, and going faster. I don't know how fast he was going, but I thought it was terrible. So I sat in the back seat. I prayed that nothing would happen. I said, I don't care if I'm killed, but don't let anything happen to my brother. I mean, that was my prayer. So I think that was the most stressful thing that I had ever gone through because I was so afraid if an accident would happen. And my brother was the only boy in the family, and I know how important that was. So that was, and of course we made it to Loyola. And on the way home, somebody else drove, thank heavens. I think that's probably the most stressful thing. Then I could come. Oh, I had some other, silly little things but as far as actual, where I felt that I was in danger or endangering someone else, and it was all my fault. I think that's why it was so stressful, because I wanted to go so badly to get to Loyola with those guys, and because the one guy was there that I liked, and he never paid any attention to me afterwards anyway, so.
So, what kinds of things did you do when you would go on dates?
Well, sometimes we'd hang out in Perry's Cafe or one other cafe and just sit there, or else we'd go to a movie.
What movies?
Oh gosh, I don't know. Or whatever they showed in Loyola at that time.
All right.
And then dances, to go to barn dances too. At that time, there were a lot of barn dances around the area.
Were they free, or did you have to pay to get in?
Usually I had to pay a little something. Well, that was another stressful time. My brother always had to drive because I couldn't drive. He was younger, but he could drive, but I couldn't. Till later on, finally, Dad taught me how to drive. But anyway, we went to a barn dance and it had rained and oh, the roads were so slippery. I was afraid we'd go in the ditch, so that was kind of, I remember that one. But we made it.
Right. What was your happiest childhood memory?
Boy, that's a tough one. I think I had lots of happy ones because I wasn't that unhappy for the most part. But the happiest? I think when we were all out playing baseball, that seemed to be the best time of the mom and dad and all of us kids. And Mom always wore a dress and she played baseball in her dress. And I think when people would come visiting, when close relatives or close friends would come visiting, those were always happy times to have somebody come to the house or we'd go visiting them. I think that visiting would be the top of the list. Because we never got to see a lot of other people otherwise.
Right. What was the most adventurous thing you did as a child?
Oh my. Well, I remember this vaguely, but I was very young. My mother's older sister had committed suicide, and so my mother was very disturbed about it. And she had, weeks when she couldn't sleep. So they finally went to see Dr. Curtis. Then Dr. Curtis said to my dad, take her out of town for a day, just even for a day. The common sense of that man is unbelievable. Anyway, so since my uncle worked on the railroad, he got us a train ticket to Watertown. We spent the whole day at the Lake Kempesca in Watertown and came back. I remember a little bit about the lake, not too much. I was very young. But I remember a little bit about the lake. And my mom said she came home and she slept like a baby after that. That's all she needed, just to get away from the house and get away from all those thoughts and, the stress that she had felt after that had happened. So that's probably my most adventurous thing I did as a child. And then, of course, when we'd go to Aberdeen, which was probably twice a year, we'd always eat at the Virginia Cafe. We'd always have our hot beef sandwich. Everybody went to the Virginia Cafe and had hot beef sandwiches whenever we'd go. And I've talked to more people about my age. Say, oh yes, we all remember the Virginia Cafe. Always having the hot beef sandwich too.
All right. Is there any other memories you'd like to share with us about your childhood?
Well, I don't know, really. Not myself so much. My brother liked to box. He's a pretty good boxer. And then I had an uncle that liked to box, and he insisted one day when they were down to visit that he and Marcus put on their boxing gloves and box until my brother gave a bloody nose, then he was done. Oh, there was something else that I just thought of, but now it left me again. Ooh, what was that? Right now I can't think of it.
All right. Is there any other memories of your childhood you'd like to share?
I had this one thing in my mind. Now I can't think of what it was. But, oh well, maybe it wasn't that important after all.
Okay. Then why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
Well, I think the children should know how we lived and how the changes that have taken place. I know my parents couldn't understand the changes that have taken place from when they were young and when we were growing up. They had a hard time understanding it, and I have a hard time understanding the young kids now. Their music, their way of thinking. So I have to think back, well, my parents had the same trouble with us. But I think it's important that they know how we lived and the changes that have taken place.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts or observations you'd like to share?
No, you're putting me on the spot. Well, I just wish that more of the younger people would take an interest in history, even my own children. Now, I didn't teach my children German, how to speak German, and I always felt it was because they're not. We've got our German mixed in with the English and the Russian and everything else, and so it wasn't the correct German, but it was a kind of a what they call a Schwäbisch or Plattdeutsch, I think. So I thought, oh no, I'm not going to teach them German. So I didn't. But I wished I would have, in a way, because it doesn't hurt to have another language, even though it isn't. Because when we went to Germany to visit some people over there, and we started speaking our dialect, they said, oh, we can understand you better than we can the Hamburg Germans. And they lived in Germany. So I thought, oh, well. And I think that's what I had found interesting, too, when my brother was in Germany to talk with former relatives that had just escaped from Russia. And then they came over here, some of them came over here to visit. We started talking. The dialect hasn't changed. Dialect just like ours. Because they all came from the same village, Nydorf, in Russia. I couldn't believe it. Over 100 years and the dialect hasn't changed. And so now, like I said, I wished I'd have taught my kids how to speak a little German. It wouldn't hurt them any, but I didn't. My youngest granddaughter, my daughter adopted her from China, and she's now in the first grade, and she's going to school in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and she's in a Spanish immersion class because they feel knowing two languages helps those children so much more than if they just know one language. So she does all the schoolwork in Spanish. And at home they do her homework in English, some of it. And so I said, oh, so I tell people, that's why we Germans were so smart. We knew it two languages. Well, but and you know, I still, to this day, I just keep amazed. How did I learn to speak English? How did we learn all this in 1 year? The English language plus all the math and spelling and reading. Teachers must have done a good job. So what else do I remember? That's about it. That's enough anyway.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Welcome.